Join the Wide Whale team May 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern for part 2 of our 3-part virtual event series, Voice of the Resident. For part 2, we will look specifically at residency. Using AI topic analysis, we've analyzed the free text of 400,000 Google reviews from residents of hundreds of top multifamily groups, including the NMHC Top 50, to identify how often 50 key topics are mentioned by residents. By filtering for and analyzing the topics by life cycle stage, we can isolate which topics are more influential during residency, versus tour, or renewal. Go to widewhale.com/data to sign up or find it in the revised community. That's widewhale.com/data.
Welcome to Decoding Multifamily, a video podcast that explores different aspects of multifamily operations and takes a deep dive into the important topics that affect the apartment industry. Watch as co-hosts Suzanne Hobson and Paul Marks engage with multifamily thought leaders, rising multifamily superstars, and apartment industry icons. Decoding is defined as the process of extracting meaningful and useful information. So watch closely as we begin Decoding Multifamily.
Well, welcome to this episode of Decoding Multifamily. I'm Paul Marks, co-host. My wonderful co-host, Suzanne Hobson, is a little under the weather today, so I'm going to be flying solo. But we have a wonderful guest today who we're going to decode, and that is Melanie French. Welcome, Melanie.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm very happy to be here.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your journey into multifamily and through multifamily. And we talked a little bit before we started to record that you've got a rich history of 4 decades in the industry. And so I'm sure you remember the things that I remember, like if someone wanted to find an apartment, they had to go to a grocery store and get a magazine. There was no such thing as the internet. So
very true.
So currently, you've been in a lot of places and throughout your journey, but currently you're the CEO of RR Living, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But let's talk a little bit about how did you first get into multifamily? What was your entree into it?
Well, I was very lucky when I was actually in high school, and then just as I was starting college, I was working as a pharmacy tech.
Oh,
And I had a lady come in and liked my customer service, so asked me to start working with her. So I started out as a weekend leasing consultant,
yep.
quickly fell in love with it, and ultimately, Paul, as scary as it sounds now, I ended up quitting college so that I could work full time as a leasing agent to make $700 a month. My father was not happy with that, but I loved it and it has worked out terrifically.
Oh my gosh. Not an uncommon story of people, being approached by someone and asking them to become a leasing agent. I've told this story before, but I had a guest on my radio show many years ago who is vice president with a company today. And years ago, they were about to graduate college. And while they were waiting, they wanted to earn some money and they got a weekend leasing job. But the one thing that was a little bit different than your story, and maybe you didn't mention this, but they got a 3-bedroom apartment free as part of their lease, as part of their package, and they rented out 2 of the bedrooms for $250 a month. So they were making $500 a month on the apartment. So I think those days are long gone.
Yes, now they did better than I did then, because no, I did not get the apartment. Although at that point I remember in my first job as an assistant manager when I was promoted, my first apartment was $265 a month,
Wow.
and I thought I was living large.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've experienced along the way. I mean, I had a conversation with someone yesterday about the fact that there are so many people in the multifamily industry working in the multifamily industry now who don't know anything but the last 4 or 5 years of
Mhm.
where everything was booming. And now they're seeing us go through a cycle. Obviously, over the period of time that you've been working, you've seen several cycles. Talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned that you had to go through on the way, and some of the changes that you've seen over your time in multifamily.
Okay. And what I would tell you is that multifamily is ever changing. And through the last 40 years, as we said, I have seen several different really cycles would be about the right word.
Mhm.
There was a point in time when everything crashed, and I can remember literally properties that were in the point of being foreclosed on and trying to manage them. I can remember actually having vendors that would sit outside our property office waiting to get paid. Paul, when I started in this industry with Johnstown American, which was an amazing company,
Yeah.
under John Lee Nielsen and George Lane, but we really focused heavily on the training. We did not initially even have the computer set up.
No.
So I remember when we set up with Little Buddy, but through those cycles, what I learned was that it was very important to understand the hows and the whys that were both the manual version as well as when you started going on to the computer, but everything from how we processed applications manually to how we processed payments to we actually wrote checks on the property and signed them and then would send them up to our regional to have signed by them, so we had two signatures. And as scary as it is in those days when you were having properties going through what was a real downturn, um, we actually I can remember knocking on residents' doors, asking them to pay in advance because I needed to pay one of our vendors or
Wow.
the utility bills. So that has changed dramatically with the influx of technology. It's much faster. You're able to wire money, you're able to pay things quickly. You also are able to get, I think, twice the work done because in the days when I started, if somebody wanted to send you a memo and ask you to do a new report, it either came through the mail or through a phone call, and you had time to pull it together because it had to be mailed in. And now it's not like that. So it's very fast paced compared to what it was.
Yeah, and I'm curious because I know that probably over this 4 decade span that you've been in the industry, you've pretty much experienced all facets of the different multifamily type properties, whether it's a new development,
Yes.
whether it's a lease up, whether it's a value add. Talk a little bit about those differences and how you approach that, and as well as the fact if it's an owned asset versus third party.
Okay. Yeah, there are so many different asset types. And I was very pointedly focused on making sure that I had the opportunity to learn each one and to manage them. So I would actually focus on trying to do that. Everything from when you had property based Section 8 to where that changed over and it very much changed into having the new construction, into lease up, into student housing. And as you said, not only the owned assets, but the third party. So
Right.
there were some unique differences in each one. For example, when you think back to what I called the old subsidized Section 8 and now the certificates and vouchers, I can remember actually walking all of the apartments, and there was a very distinct difference in what you saw in the apartments in those Section 8 apartments that where people were fighting tooth and nail to be able to support their families and utilizing those those programs in the best way they could to be able to support their family while they went out and worked. And one difference was in those apartments, they may not have as much furniture, they may not have as many material things, but there was a very clear difference where you would see the Bibles out. You would see their rules for how they ran their families, I
Mm,
guess. And you didn't see that in the conventional assets, especially in the higher end. It was much more of a materialistic view in those. So I always found that interesting.
yeah,
And as far as had the differences in running, say, a subsidized versus a conventional, at one point in time, those subsidized, some of them in Mississippi didn't even have air conditioning. So it was a very different time in the business. And as you looked at the differences, there was no difference in how you treated the customer. All customers, regardless of how much they made or how they paid their rent, you treated them the same on the service aspect. There were times when there were different owners that did not take care of their properties, and those you had to manage very differently. And you learned that from a third party standpoint, it really was about what was that owner's strategy? What did they want from that business? And that was how we managed. And so, one of the learnings I've taken from that through the years is that how important it is to really meet one on one when you are working on a third party asset and managing it. You really should meet one on one with those owners, understand what is their true business strategy, what are they trying to accomplish, and then go from there. When you look at new development, Paul, wow, that is such an amazing opportunity to watch a community get built from the ground up and from the planning side. That is much more of a marketing play in lead generation and being ahead of the game. How do you compare to the other new developments in the area? Because you've got to really find that art in how do I maximize the revenue? How do I ensure we have amenities that the customers want? You know, when you think about new development, Paul, I don't know if you know this, but you start really working on those assets 3 or 4 years before they come out of the ground.
right.
And 3 or 4 years is like a blink of an eye in what the multifamily resident wants from their community. So you're trying to gauge very forward looking, what amenities are they going to want? What services are they going to want? And then when they get built, make sure that is still exactly what it needs to be. And if not, how do you pivot and how do you pivot quickly so that you're still maximizing all of that revenue and getting leased up quickly? I think that was a big piece there. You know, and if you've ever looked at the student housing, that is a different animal on its own.
It is.
Oh my goodness gracious, Paul. There, so many times we're managing by the bed. And so you have so many more residents that you're dealing with. And because you also have the parents. So it really is when we say two heads per bed from an occupancy standpoint, I think if you look at that on the student, you're really thinking four heads per bed because you may have two people, but you've also got parents for
Right,
each of those.
right.
So that is a different environment its own. You know, the not only is how you collect the rent and you call it installments for payments and it's over a 12-month period versus a typical lease and a monthly rent. That's very different, along with the amenities and what services you offer. So each genre of this industry is unique in its own way. You know, one thing about value add, if when we have time to talk about that, I think
Sure.
that is a great segment in today's environment.
Yeah. And by the way, when you mentioned student, the one thing that really boggles my mind about operating student properties is how quickly they have to turn those. It's like all hands on deck, and
Yes.
they've already got contractors lined up to do whatever they need to do in the units, and you've got a 2 or 3 week period to get everything accomplished in for all the units on the property. It's just amazing that and it's a completely different animal, as you said. I'm curious, and I'm sure our audiences as well. Out of all the different genres, as you put it, that you've been exposed to over the years. Do you have a favorite, the one that you enjoy working in the most?
Oh wow, I that's hard to say because I really love each different part. I think I probably would appreciate the B and what you might call C assets that you're repositioning
Hmm.
and building them out with that value add, because in those assets, we're able to see the end result of your work. There's some amount of pride that you can take when you've taken a community, you've taken someone's home, and you've been able to improve it through value add. And even from an owner perspective, one thing I learned in Cortland when doing so many of the value add and renovations there, because in my 6 years there, we did more than 45,000 renovations.
Wow.
And many times we increase the rent for that owner and investor $400 to $600 a month by making those improvements. So for me, being able to see that come to fruition and to watch that vision come to life was huge. Another piece of it that I thoroughly enjoyed was taking the senior housing for those active living over 55 and being able to create an environment with one of my construction partners at Cortland where we did those renovations while the residents were living in them. And Paul, the way that we did that, I know my team thought I was crazy when I first said, "Hey, let's try to do them occupied." But I had a young gentleman that was our construction leader there, and he was kind enough to go along with this harebrained idea that Melanie French had. Um, and we did it well. We took those communities and we did it like a well-oiled machine. The team did, and it wasn't me. But Paul, we actually offered the residents. I can remember in Vegas it was easy because we offered those residents a 3-day stay at one of the casinos,
Oh,
which we got a great price on. Or we would give them a $500 gift card and they could go stay with family, which they probably still took the gift card and went to the
I guess.
casino, even though they were staying with family. But during that period of time, our construction team went in and they literally replaced the cabinets, the flooring, painted all of the rooms. And we did that by before we ever started that renovation, Paul. I had a team that went in. We took photos of everything in the residence cabinets, everything that they left. We asked them to box up their kitchen into a yellow colored box. The bathroom went in a blue box. Their bedroom went in another. And then we covered all of that with plastic. And that was what we did. And then when the resident came back in after that 3-day period of the home being renovated, by that point, we already had the photos of their kitchen cabinets. So we had tried to put everything back in. We made it a big show. We videoed the resident going into their home for the first time.
Wow.
They had flowers sitting out, and
Oh,
it was a huge reveal. And it went so well, and the residents were so thankful. So that was also a very meaningful time for me.
that's wonderful. Uh, I'm curious, and I'm sure our audience is as well. As far as all the different places that you've worked in your career, uh, where have you been based? Have you moved around? Have you been in the same spot?
Oh, I have moved around my entire career. And fortunately, my husband, who's retired Coast Guard, was willing to move with me. And my kids will tell you they grew up all over the United States. So we have lived everywhere from I started out in Mississippi.
Hmm.
So good Southern roots there. Went to New Orleans, Louisiana. Then I've worked in and lived in South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia twice, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Jacksonville, Florida twice, St. Augustine. And now, while my house is in Jacksonville, Florida. My husband's in Jacksonville, Florida. But with our living, I have an apartment and I live in Dallas.
Oh,
So, yeah. I will say that over my 37 years of being married, as my husband will tell you, in a row, not sure why he puts that in there, but we have really gotten to enjoy a lot of different states, meet some terrific people, and learn different aspects of this industry, such as in the Northeast, you have residents in the Pennsylvania and Maryland and New York, all those different areas, and they live in their apartment homes for 20 and 30 years.
Right.
They raise their entire families. And you don't see that down in the
Mm-mm.
South. It's much more transient.
Join the Wide Whale team May 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern for part 2 of our 3-part virtual event series, Voice of the Resident. For part 2, we will look specifically at residency. Using AI topic analysis, we've analyzed the free text of 400,000 Google reviews from residents of hundreds of top multifamily groups, including the NMHC Top 50, to identify how often 50 key topics are mentioned by residents. By filtering for and analyzing the topics by life cycle stage, we can isolate which topics are more influential during residency, versus tour, or renewal. Go to widewhale.com/data to sign up or find it in the revised community. That's widewhale.com/data.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. That's always been something that I've wondered about. Why is it so different in that geographic area than in the South? But I
Yeah.
don't know. I want to jump to something else. We've got about another 15 minutes or so to talk, but I wanted to ask you because we talked about the different places you lived, and you have your CPM, your Certified Property Managers
Hmm.
certification or designation through IREM, the Institute of Real Estate Management. Where did you get that? What chapter were you in when you got that?
Let's see. I believe I first got that. It would have been in when I was in Maryland working with UDR. That would have been at that point. And then additionally, I took classes when I lived in Colorado with AIMCO
Hmm.
and have tried to always continue my education, and IRM is a great place to do that. You know, I believe in having that CPM designation because I think that when you have other industry peers that you are able to partner with, and I see it now with my chief membership also,
Hmm.
you're able to partner with peers whether they're in your industry or outside of it, and that keeps our learning fresh. And with an industry that moves as quickly as multifamily does, and when we're so tied to the economy itself, having other people to base ideas out of or to get their thoughts on how they handled something is critical. And that's what I really see as a benefit from IRM. Same thing with National Multi-Housing Council
Hmm.
and the National Apartment Association. Those are great organizations for partnering and for just growing your industry and business.
You know, it's interesting because I see a lot of people in the C-suite level in the multifamily industry that have their CPMs, and I know what it takes to get a CPM. It's a commitment
Mhm.
of not only
Yes,
time but money. It's not an
yes.
inexpensive designation to get. And there are IREM chapters. I'm in Houston, and I think when I was very involved in the IREM chapter here for several years, and at that time it may still be. It was the second largest chapter in the country, I think, behind Chicago. But it was more based in the commercial real estate, office and more commercial than in the multifamily. So they had very few multifamily people attending the regular events, but they had a large group of multifamily people that were sitting for their CPM. So obviously, it is something that's a value to people in multifamily, especially people who are committed to excellence and to leading.
Mhm. Yes, very much so. And I think that one of the things the CPM does, as well as some of the other designations, is it puts such a strong emphasis on ethics. And that is very important in
Yeah.
our business. You know, you see the amount of money that goes through any apartment community, whether it is a community that still accepts rent payments in the office or one that's online. We have we have a responsibility to our customers to always treat them fairly and to look at their money as though it's our own. And I think the ethics that you get through any of those groups is an important part of that. And, you know, there are also the learning opportunities, and whether they're online seminars that people can attend or they're in person. You know, I know that for me, I've not gotten involved as much on the Dallas chapter
Mhm.
with Aram yet as I would like to, and that's something I want to rectify. But as we've been building out our living, I will say I've spent most of my time out in the field and doing that. So yeah, I think it's a great organization, and all of them are.
I want to ask you a little bit about over your career, the role that people have played, that people that you have worked with, as far as have you had any mentors, or did you have any mentors originally? Do you still have any mentors? And as far as also, how do you surround yourself with the kind of people you need to build an organization to keep it going in
Mhm.
the direction that you want it to go in?
Oh, great question. For me, people are the key. And I am a very authentic leader, one that is very involved with my teams, and I want to be present all the time. And I think I learned that from having good mentors. I have been fortunate to have opportunities to grow in this business because of mentors that believed in me and because of opportunities that were given to me, not just because I worked hard and I was direct and focused, but you always need to have somebody that is there that you can bounce off ideas off of. And as a result, I've tried to be a mentor to others as well. You know, I can remember back with Johnstown, I had a regional manager that was a mentor to me and taught me so many things. And then when I went with AIMCO, I had a mentor that was our chief people officer in Jim Purvis. And what he did for me, he saw something in me that I did not see myself, Paul. And that was he came, and as I was an RVP running 18,000 units and 81 properties at that point over 5 states, our chief of human resources came to me and said, "Hey, I want you to come and start our learning and organizational development department." And I looked at him and said, no, I'm an operator. I'm not a trainer. And he said, "No, you need to do this, and I want you to do it." So through time, after talking with Terry Considine and Jim, I ended up taking that chance and getting out of my element with the understanding that if I wanted to go back to the field, I could. But what Jim saw in me and what he realized, Paul, was that to really build out that organization at that point when you had almost 3,200 employees at AIMCO then, you had to have somebody that the organization as well itself had confidence in, that they knew, and that all of the other leaders would see the reason to pay for the programs, because obviously you were going to be taking money to build this out. So I very quickly got my SHRM designation as a senior professional of human resources, because if I was going to be doing that, I wanted to understand it. So I learned so much on the HR side, the training side. We built out a training organization of 30 some odd people. We launched an LMS. We built an amazing program at AIMCO that still has a lot of pieces in place today. And I'm very proud of that. But that was because of a mentor. And then from there, when I went and worked with Cortland, I will say that I think that Stephen DeFrance
Mm.
has been a mentor to me and what he has built through the years. When I started with Cortland, we had roughly 9,000 units. And so by the time I left, I think we were up about 55,000.
Wow.
So really building out that property management organization and at the growth rate that we took over communities, that taught me so much. There, I really learned how to partner and build out a great renovation program. We also manufactured everything we put into the homes. So I was able to go to Vietnam and China
Ah,
and visit those factories to see everything being made. That was an amazing opportunity for me. And I've been fortunate to carry all those lessons forward, be able to share them with others, and act as a mentor to watch people grow and see people that started with me as a leasing agent
hmm.
15 years ago that now are running organizations themselves.
What a journey. I mean, that's unbelievable, all the things that you've been able to do. Yeah, and I want to ask you because, we kind of joked about it at the very beginning, but some of the changes you've seen over the years in multifamily, as far as, I mean, technology is something that is completely changed and is continuing to change on a very
Yes.
rapid pace. But also, I'm interested in your opinion on or your thoughts on uh, what did the pandemic do to not only change the way you think about operating, but also the technology that's in use today.
Oh, wow. The pandemic did so much, I feel like, in our industry. I think it opened eyes for one thing, where at Aimco, for example, we started doing centralization back, gosh, in 20 years ago, and did it very well. But it didn't really become a large change for most organizations until the pandemic, when you had to be able to operate. I think one of the changes that we've seen, Paul, is that the pandemic taught us that our communities and our amenities were never built for 24/7 use. All of a sudden you had all of your residents home 24 hours a day, and yet your office staff may or may not have been there.
Right.
I kept our offices open as much as we could have when I was doing that, and we were in there, and definitely kept them operating. But we had to find ways to really work with our residents, and some of those ways were creating new videos for how can they make repairs themselves.
Hmm.
We did videos on reading story time for kids to try to help the residents with their, because they now had children home. So you really had to adapt. And what we've seen coming out of that is still a mentality with a lot of employees that they want to do remote work. And while that has its benefits, it also has its detractors in the fact that we are still a people and service oriented business. Multifamily at its very heart is we provide homes.
Right.
We provide homes where people raise their families. And that is such a great responsibility, because you think about it, those homes, they're making memories every day. Just like if you have a construction group on your community, it's always important to tell them that to them, it's a job or a project, a construction project. But to our residents, that parking lot or that patio, that's their front yard and their backyard. And you can't forget that, whether
Right.
it's through the pandemic when nobody was there or now when you've got everything back in full force. But we are seeing a lot more centralization, and that started for most of the organizations during the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a very common thing that people have also echoed that same sentiment. I want to ask you a little bit about um, the fact that you've got challenges like a pandemic. Um, but what do you see as the future challenges now that we're out of the pandemic for multifamily?
Well, I would tell you that I think the current economy itself is a challenge. We are seeing again something we haven't seen since 2009-10, when you're starting to see properties that may not be able to keep up with their mortgage payments, and so you're seeing owners in some cases trying to save money and cut costs,
Hmm.
or you're seeing owners sometimes where they want to utilize centralization to reduce payroll costs. Well, you can do that to some extent. But at the end of the day, we're still a people business and a service business, and you still have to have some staff to come and create this community feel. And I think that is one of the differences we're going to continue to see. As people start continuing towards this centralization and streamlining the number of people in an office, then that means that our customers have to learn how to deal with us in different ways. And we become so technology dependent that if we're not careful, Paul, we're going to lose that human element.
Right.
And yet, that human element is also how we increase our revenue and raise rent. Is at the end of the day, an apartment is four walls, and the people pay for what you offer them, but they lease because of the people. And so, creating that community feel, we can't let that get lost simply because you have less staff, because that is part of what our residents pay for.
We've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask you about, I mean, because you've talked a lot about the fact that you said you've been in the business for over 40 years, or you've been married for 37. So you got you got two different relationships that are
Yes.
long-standing relationships. Uh, but what do you like to do when you're not working? What are some of the things that you enjoy doing, and when do you get to do it?
Yes. I love to spend time with my three grandkids. That's always huge. Family time. I love to take the motorhome and see the United
Uh,
States, and or to go out on the boat with my husband. At the end of the day, I still am going to always work, and I consider that that is a vacation sometimes,
right.
getting to go visit the communities. My heart is with my teams on site. So one of the best practices I've launched and have done for years now is we do a weekly huddle.
Hmm.
And I consider that kind of a vacation because it's an all hands huddle every Tuesday morning. We go over what numbers have performed, how the properties are doing, and it's my opportunity to see every single one of our employees and to celebrate their successes or to focus us on where we need to go. So while that's not a fun activity outside of
Right.
work, to me, it's still a vacation for me.
When you actually get to do some of the things that aren't work related, are you
Yes.
are you able to shut that part of you off, or are you always still thinking about it?
I do have that ability to shut it off because I've hired great people.
Yeah.
And that's the real key there, is knowing that you have a team of professionals that are going to take care of it. At the end of the day, it's not Melanie's world. It's the world of my teams on site. And by hiring great people and empowering them to do what they do best, I can leave and can go enjoy the time with my husband when I go back home to Florida. And that's an important part of it. You've got to be able to rejuvenate.
Right. Exactly. Well, before we end the session, I wanted to give you a chance to tell any of our audience, if they want to find out more about you, about RR, if they wanted to reach out to you with a question, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, I would love to talk to any of them. I think it is so important to give back to everybody in this industry or those that just want to join this industry. So I can always be reached at my email, which is mfrench@rrliving.com. So very easy, mfrench@rrliving.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to be able to help or to just get to meet people.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Melanie, for being on. I do want to remind our audience that Decoding Multifamily is part of the Multifamily Media Network. You can go to multifamilymedianetwork.com not only to see this podcast, but you can see all the other hosts of great podcasters that we have. They're all industry icons and multifamily thought leaders. You can follow us there, and I would urge you to subscribe to the weekly newsletter that keeps you up to date on
Yes.
everything that's happening in the industry. So thanks again so much. We're going to be back with our next episode. I'm wishing my co-host Suzanne Hobson to get well soon, so she can join me back here, because it's hard to do on your own. So anyway, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Decoding Multifamily video podcast, and please tune in to future episodes. If you would like to subscribe to our weekly newsletter or discuss being a podcast guest on Decoding Multifamily, please go to multifamilymedianetwork.com. Thank you for watching Decoding Multifamily.